It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Hello, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is the Larry Kudlow Show, and it's great to be with you as always. By the way, you can get us over the internet. You can get this show, radio show, over the internet, live streaming. LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. You can hear us all across the country, throughout the world, including the solar system and the Milky Way. So you can get us everywhere. And during the week, please dial up Fabulous Fox Business Network every day, Thursday, and Monday through Friday, every day, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m., 4 to 5 p.m. The name of the show is Kudlow, 4 to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday on Fabulous Fox Business Network. And if you can't get there at 4, well, just text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. DVR the show. DVR is not that hard to do, believe me. Or you could TiVo the show. A certain former president, who happens to be a friend of mine, tells me he TiVos the show. I don't know. I don't know about TiVo. I know about DVR, but you can TiVo if you want to TiVo. I want to talk about... I want to begin by talking about this whole crack-up of the Secret Service, which has not given President Trump, former President Trump, I call him President Trump, has not given him full presidential protection. And this story gets worse and worse. And Mr. Trump, you know, after 2 failed assassination attempts, providentially, they failed. The Lord's hand, they failed. Still, we don't know, and he doesn't know, if he's getting full presidential protection. And this news conference that the new, acting director of the Secret Service, the guy's name is Rowe. I mean, that was just word salad, bureaucratese. I don't know what he was talking about. Said nothing. He said absolutely nothing. And that is so alarming. Absolutely alarming. You know, after the first assassination attempt at Butler Field in Pennsylvania, where Mr. Trump was grazed by a bullet in the ear, 1 person in the crowd was killed, several injured. The Secret Service told everybody, but they told the Trump campaign that they would get full presidential protection. And that was a lie, an untruth, okay? Washington bureaucrats, I guess they don't lie, but they do tell untruths. It wasn't true because we learned that with the Trump golf course episode, a failed assassination attempt, we learned and saw clearly there was no protection in the outer perimeter of that golf course, and there was inadequate protection on the golf course. They had not scoped it out ahead of time, and this lame excuse that they didn't know he was going to play golf. Of course, anytime he's in Mar-a-Lago on a Sunday or Saturday or Sunday, anytime if it's a nice day, he's going to go out and play golf. They should know that. And if they had the full complement of agents, then they would have scoped out the interior perimeter, the exterior perimeter, drones, dogs, the whole 9 yards. It wasn't true. That didn't happen. It was a miracle that one of the agents saw in the brush, in the bushes, barrel of the gun sticking out. I mean, that's a miracle. It's a golf course, with bushes everywhere. But again, the service should have been all over it. And it turns out there was a pathway into that spot. We saw camera pictures, and there was an opening, and people knew there was an opening. And in the past, that opening was covered, but not this time. And the Palm Beach County Sheriff said, well, he's not the sitting president, this would have had the entire golf course surrounded. But because he's not, security was limited to the area that the Secret Service deems possible. There wasn't any proper sweep. Now, we heard this acting head of the Secret Service. It's just gobbledygook, bureaucratic gobbledygook. We need a shift in operations. What does that mean? We need a shift in operations. I'm looking at my notes. Let's see. The Secret Service was to blame, he says. Ronald Rowe, this is the head of the service. He talked about a communications deficiency out in Butler, Pennsylvania. He said the service was wrong and made mistakes. They didn't connect with the local authorities. The agency is now moving into the accountability phase. What does that mean, accountability phase? Would you tell me what is it? It doesn't mean anything. Communications deficiency, I know that. But the whole presser that this guy Rowe had, paradigm shift he talked about, what does a paradigm shift mean? Or a shift in operations? Or here's one. Principles of Secret Service methodologies has to be changed. What does that mean? The methodology failed. Now, I guess they've suspended some of the agents. Frankly, my point was, going back to July 13th and the awful assassination attempt where the bullet grazed President Trump's ear, my thought, and I said this on the TV show, I said this here on the radio show, is all the agents who were there in the field and the leadership of those agencies, it's the Pittsburgh office and, frankly, the Washington office, they all should have been put on administrative leave, taken off the field, administrative leave, and part of the investigation. And hopefully the investigators will investigate properly. That's what they should have done. Now, the interesting thing is Mr. Trump was very gracious about particularly the Florida episode. He says, this evil would-be assassin got within a few hundred yards of where I stood, but thankfully our outstanding Secret Service who was there that day, and to all the sheriffs, I want to express my thanks to the Secret Service and all the sheriffs and law enforcement down in Florida, the heroes who helped to apprehend the attacker. Well, Mr. Trump's being very gracious, and he was right, of course. In a sense, the Florida episode was an individual success because of miraculously that agent saw the barrel of the gun and fired off shots, and eventually they caught the son of a you-know-what. But it was a bureaucratic failure because they had not surrounded the golf course. They had not done what might be called full presidential protection. Now, the House passed a bill, and that's really the clearest point that we can make so far. They say, and this is bipartisan. I'll give credit where credit is due, Democrats and Republicans. The vote was 405-0. And the guts of the bill says impose uniform standards for the security of presidents, vice presidents, and major White House candidates. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's exactly right. But that bill has to pass the Senate. I'm sure it will, but it's going to take time. There's still, 45 days left in the campaign. Joe Biden has not done a thing. I think you heard one word, one sentence. And Alejandro Mayorkas, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security, he's the guy who oversees the Secret Service. And he is just basically nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. I mean, he just comes up with last Tuesday. I mean, it's all word salad. The Secret Service has enhanced the former president's security posture, so he's receiving a level of security commensurate with the fact that he's a former president and on the campaign trail. So his alignment with the security posture of our president is, in fact, quite appropriate. What's that mean? Here, this is what the House bill imposes uniform standards for the security of presidents, vice presidents, and major White House candidates. So that means if you're a major candidate, obviously Trump is, and by the way, the vice president, although she's already covered, they get full presidential protection. But Mayorkas didn't say that. Word salad, security commensurate, alignment with the security posture. What? Just nonsense. Mayorkas, nowhere to be found. Biden, nowhere to be found. Here's my point. You got, I believe, is it 45 days left? I believe it's 45 days left in the campaign. Mr. Trump is out there. I mean, so is Kamala, but Kamala's not out there near as much as Trump. And the question is, two questions. Number one, is he now getting total presidential type protection? Full protection, as per the House bill. Has that happened yet? We don't know. He's out there, but we don't know that yet. The second point I want to make is the Secret Service itself cannot be counted on under current leadership, the top levels, and badly needs reform and change. It's part of the swamp. And let me add the FBI is part of the swamp. And let me also add separately the CIA and the intelligence community, part of the Washington, D.C. swamp. How good is the Secret Service? Well, I suspect the field agents, many of them are very good. Very good. I suspect those who surround the candidate or the president and would take a bullet, I think they're very good, but not all of them are very good. There's a lot of DEI in the recruitment of Secret Service. They want more money, but they've already got $3 billion worth of money. They've had a huge increase in money. I don't think it's a money problem. I think it's an execution problem at the top. It's a management problem at the top. The place is run by liberals. My suspicions question whether they really wanted to help Mr. Trump, because if he wins, he's going to go and he's going to drain the swamp. He's going to go through all these security agencies, and it will not be pleasant for most of them. It will not be pleasant. How good is the Secret Service with left-wing biases and DEI hiring practices? It's a rat's nest that needs to be completely cleared out. That's my point. The leadership, the top layers, a rat's nest of DEI and liberal and left liberal people. And that is so concerning to me because I fear that there will be other crazy people going after Mr. Trump in the next 45 days. I fear that. And what I heard yesterday at the news conferences and what I didn't hear from Mayorkas, I mean, the House bill is the best thing. Get the Senate to pass it Monday. I don't think they're even in session, but we'll see. Pass it Monday. Get Biden to sign it or get Jill Biden to sign it, one of them. I don't know who's running the country right now. And give them the full protection. And get rid of the top layers of the service right away. Stop dithering. Get rid of them. Put people there. Fire people who are inept, including this guy, the acting director, Rouse, whatever his name is. Ronald Rowe. It's not personal. I never do personal. I'm just saying it's policy. The service, unfortunately, failed. And so far, we do not know if anything really has changed. And Mr. Trump's life remains in danger for the last 45 days of the campaign. I will stop here. We'll talk about this later in the show with Aaron Cohen and some other security experts. But I'm telling you, what I saw yesterday with this press conference, what I have not heard from Mayorkas or Biden, infuriates me. 2 attempted assassinations. We haven't had this kind of thing since the 60s, and then, of course, they took a shot. They hit Reagan in 1981. So that was 40 years ago plus. I want the service to do its job. I'm Kudlow. We'll take a quick break. I'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
Before we get to our political panel, Joe Concha and Roger Stone at the half hour, two very, very smart guys, I just want to mention another event this week. The Federal Reserve slashed their target interest rate by 50 basis points, 0.5%. That's the kind of thing that is used in emergencies, 50 basis points, like COVID or 9/11. I think it was completely inappropriate. They should have gone with 25 or not at all. And I think the supercut of 50 was basically a Jerome Wallace, Jay Powell, rather. It was a gift to Kamala Harris, a gift. Sort of try to jam interest rates down, like mortgage rates or credit card rates. I don't know whether it's going to work. He could have waited until after the election. The next Fed meeting is the day after the election. Why didn't you wait till then instead of 6 weeks before the election with this big bang supercut, like spiking the punch bowl? Remember, when the Fed takes money out, it's called shrinking the punch bowl. This was spiking the punch bowl, okay? Why did he do it? In a relatively decent economy, at least at the top. Middle-income people and lower-income people are suffering, however, from very high prices that are up over 20% during the Biden-Harris administration. And, things like groceries, electricity, everyday household needs, for some of them 30% or 35, 40%. And even the overall inflation rate yearly has not reached the Fed's target of 2%. The overall inflation rate is about 2.5%. So this was a gift, a political gift to Kamala Harris by Jay Powell and the Fed. There's one dissenter. We'll talk about this later with John Carney and Conrad DeQuatros. But I'm telling you, the Fed was playing politics. They should have stayed out. It's a big shame. But you know what? Change is on the way. That's what I think. Change is coming.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're going to do some politics here. We got two smart people. I think we're still looking for Concha, but I'm sure we'll find them. Meanwhile, Roger Stone, longtime political consultant, now host of WABC Radio's The Roger Stone Show on Sundays between 3 and 6 p.m., on many of these very same stations. Roger, it's 3 o'clock now, right?
3 hours on Sunday afternoon. Politics, and politics.
Yeah, nobody does it better than you. We're looking for Concha. So, Roger, Joe Biden had his first cabinet meeting in a year. But wait a second. His wife, Jill, ran the meeting. Okay? So my question is, who's running the U.S. government? Kamala, Jill, Joe, Mayorkas? Who's running the government, Roger Stone?
How about perhaps nobody?
Yeah.
I mean, this reminds me of Edith Galt Wilson,
yes,
the first lady of Woodrow Wilson, who was incapacitated at the beginning of his second term, was kept from public sight. No one really saw him. It is said that his wife would put the pen in his hand and move his pen across official documents. And, of course, in the pre-television age, this was easy to conceal from the people. It's very clear here that Joe, and I actually do feel badly for him, I don't think he is mentally and physically capable of doing this job anymore. That's why I predicted all the way back in June of last year at the Turning Point USA conference in Palm Beach that Kamala Harris would briefly become president prior to the election. I still believe that's a very real possibility, not because they need her to run the country, of course, but because they need to elevate her candidacy by making her a historical figure. She would then be the first woman president. Eat your heart out, Hillary Clinton.
But they never did invoke the 25th Amendment.
No, but I think they threatened to, and if they're threatened to do it once to get him to drop out of the race, I see no reason why they would not threaten to do it again. The abuse of the Bidens, and I'm not a Biden fan, quite obviously, but to have the incumbent president of the United States address his last national convention after midnight and then tell him to get out of town, that he can't even be there when they nominate Kamala Harris, for whom no delegate or voter or primary or caucus voter ever voted for, but nonetheless, to not have him president for that, they want him to disappear. They want it to be as if he was never president.
Yep. We found Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, found him someplace. We had an all points bulletin out for him. Joe's new book is Progressively Worse: Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkey. As I say, as a Fox News contributor, you can see him every week, by the way, on the Kudlow Show in fabulous Fox Business Network. Joe Concha, we're talking to Roger. Joe Biden had his first cabinet meeting in a year, which is pathetic by itself. But wait a second, I'm wrong. Jill Biden ran the cabinet meeting. Roger correctly invokes the historical figure of Edith Wilson, whose husband, Woodrow Wilson, was incapacitated, and she ran the country in 1919 and 1920. Anyway, Joe, do you have a thought on Jill Biden as the president? I mean, actually, she's not in the line of succession, but apparently she ran the cabinet meeting.
Wow, we have a fake doctor being a fake president. This is awesome. Sleep tight, America. Oh, look, Larry, and sorry about the connection problem before. Look, we've always been asking now for months and months and even years, who's really running the country? Because clearly Joe Biden wasn't. And some people say, well, it's Barack Obama. Maybe it's Susan Rice. No, it's probably been Jill Biden all along. And that's why she didn't want her husband to step down or not run again when he should have announced years ago, because she wanted the power and didn't care about her husband's own health, about what this may do to him in terms of his legacy. She wanted to be first lady because she knew that she would ultimately be running the country. And the fact that the Biden administration has the audacity, that they have the moxie, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to just publicly show, see, here she is. She's at the head of the table. Joe Biden looks like he's about to fall asleep, and there's nothing you could do about it. Once again, I'd love to see an interview with her, Jill Biden, where you ask her, how long have you known about your husband's cognitive decline? And sure enough, she did one with NBC News. Peter Alexander, supposed to be a serious anchor, and he didn't even bring it up. So, that's just the way this is going to go. The double standard, triple standard continues.
Roger, on that point, it's a serious point, because foreign leaders who are our enemies in places like Moscow and Beijing and Tehran and North Korea, they look at this and they see that nobody's in charge. And this cabinet meeting, the picture of her at the head of the table, he was in the middle, that's where presidents are, but she was at the top of the table. He spoke for 2 minutes. She apparently spoke longer than he spoke. I don't know who else spoke. But my point is, Roger, they take a look at that and maybe they get adventuresome. I mean, in other words, this is a serious national security threat.
No, our old friend Jack Kemp always used to say that weakness provokes aggression. And he was absolutely right about that. You can see exactly how our foreign adversaries would look at the situation and think that this was a time of weakness. And that we would not be able to respond quickly to some kind of attack or foreign policy initiative against the country. We're in a very, very dangerous time. I would remind you, while we were all focusing on the horrific second assassination attempt against Donald Trump, that Secretary Blinken gave NATO the authority to use long-range U.S.-supplied NATO missiles to hit targets deep inside of Russia. Putin has made it very clear. By the way, I'm not a Putin fan. Just because you're opposed on spending more in Ukraine doesn't mean you're pro-Russia. I'm speaking to you, the folks at the Guardian.
Yep.
But that is an invitation for World War III. We are drifting closer and closer to World War III, while most Americans, understandably, are more concerned with the price of gasoline and how much their dollar buys at the grocery store, and the diminishing value of their retirement vehicles like their IRA or their 401k. So it's a very, very scary time in America, because I think the people in charge are perfectly willing to generate a world war if that's what they think can keep Donald Trump out of the White House.
And I would just add, Joe, my my opening comments were about the Secret Service failures and fiascos. And I have no confidence in the leadership. You saw this guy, Rowe, nothing but, cliches and word salad. There's some very brave people in the Secret Service, but they failed miserably at Butler Field in Pennsylvania. And it was just incredible. The one service guy saw the barrel of the gun in the bushes of the Trump golf course in Florida. Okay. But they didn't guard the perimeters. Trump does not yet, still to this point, Trump does not yet have full presidential type protection. All right. The House bill gives it to him. If the Senate signs it, then you'd have it. But we'll see how that plays out. But the point I'm making, Joe Concha, is Mayorkas is saying nothing about this, nothing but word salad. Joe Biden is incapacitated for whatever reasons. And I have no confidence that this Secret Service, we got 45 days left, and I'm praying for the safety of Donald Trump. But I'm watching the Secret Service. These reports have not yet been fully fleshed out. The investigations are not fully fleshed out. This is something Mayorkas should be doing. He doesn't. This is something Joe Biden should be doing. He doesn't. And this is something Kamala Harris is vice president. She doesn't even talk about it, Joe. I mean, I'm very worried because I still don't believe that Trump has adequate protection no matter what they say.
He absolutely does not. I mean, can you believe this guy? He is in a sniper's nest next to the sixth hole at Trump International for 12 hours. Not one person could walk the perimeter. You would have seen him quite easily if you did that. So what does that tell us? I mean, I understand incompetence, but I'm almost past that point, Larry, because for this to happen twice in 64 days where you don't secure the one roof that has line of sight to the former president in Butler, Pennsylvania, where you still send him out on stage when you know there's a threat out there. How could that possibly happen? And here's the worst part. No one's been fired. Not one person.
Right.
The head of the Secret Service, she had to resign in shame, but Joe Biden won't fire anybody. Kamala Harris, as you said, won't talk about it. And Mayorkas is the most worthless person probably on the planet, doesn't do anything about it either because he knows there's no accountability, so screw it. And I'm worried. I'm worried that we are now asking the question, not can Donald Trump win, can he even get to Election Day, given that it seems like the Secret Service doesn't seem to be very interested in protecting him?
Yeah, 100%. All these agencies, just one last point, Roger Stone. These agencies are run. I put the Secret Service in. I know all about the service. I've served 2 presidents, and I like the Secret Service agents, many brave men and women. But the leadership at the top, and there's so much DEI in the recruitment of these agents and so forth. But at the top, it's like the FBI. It's like the CIA. It's like a lot of the intelligence agencies. These have been populated by liberals or ultra-liberals. They hate Trump. They know if Trump wins, he's going to clean house and drain the swamp, quote unquote. He's even got Elon Musk talking up this efficiency. That's all about these agencies. I have no confidence in them, Roger, none whatsoever. And when I watch this guy Rowe at this presser, it just I'll say one thing. It made me afraid for Trump, and it kind of broke my heart because they don't know what they're doing. It's very clear they don't know what they're doing. And all the leadership, the top 3 or 4 or 5 levels, should be completely removed with competent people, Roger. I'll give you the last word before the break.
Larry, it could be worse than that. It's entirely possible that they do know what they're doing.
No.
And that's what really disturbs me. I completely share your concern. In fact, I'll go so far as to predict that there will be another attempt on the president's life.
I'll say this before the break. I interviewed Senator Tommy Tuberville, who's becoming a very influential figure, I might add, in the U.S. Senate. But Tuberville basically said what you just said, Roger Stone. Tuberville believes that the top levels of these agencies, including the service, wouldn't mind if something happened to Donald Trump. It's a horrible thing to think about, but he said the same thing. And I've noticed in the days since then, he said that about a week ago, others have echoed that terrible thought. Boy, this country needs change. Anyway, Joe Concha, Fox News, Roger Stone's show right here, The Roger Stone Show, 3 to 6 p.m. Sundays on many of these same stations. I'm Kudlow. We'll take a quick break and come back and talk about Teamsters, and also Virginia may be in play.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
We're talking politics with Joe Concha, Fox News contributor. Joe's new book, Progressively Worse. That's so great. Progressively is exactly right. And why today's Democrats ain't your daddy's donkey. And my longtime pal, Roger Stone, who's hosting the WABC radio show, The Roger Stone Show, which is on Sundays, 3 to 6 p.m., on many of these very same stations. Joe Concha, the Teamsters, rank and file, scored 60% favor Trump. Now, the leadership didn't come out for Trump, but they didn't endorse Kamala either. So it looks like, I think Trump's going to carry the Teamsters. And like-minded unions. In other words, it's not just the Teamsters. I think there are other unions, maybe not the service union workers, the SEIU, but, various workers that work with their hands, have hard hats, driving the trucks and so forth and so on. I think this is a real warning sign for Kamala and a real plus for Mr. Trump. What do you think, Joe?
I think it's the biggest news to come out of this week, quite frankly, if we're talking Monday until now, because, as you say, it's not just the Teamsters. It will also be rank and file of the United Auto Workers, not the leadership, of course. And by the way, the Teamsters leadership, if you're listening, you are so spineless. Did you see the statement they put out justifying why they wouldn't endorse Trump? Because they said, we will endorse who our members choose to endorse. So that the statement, they said it, I'm paraphrasing, we're not endorsing Kamala Harris because she didn't get a majority of votes. In other words, 51%. As you said, it was 60 to 30, basically, as far as Trump's support there. But they said, and we won't support Donald Trump because he didn't have unanimous support. The Teamsters, you want 100%? That's the only way you're going to go? But it doesn't matter because when they release those numbers, which are devastating to Kamala Harris, to your point, that was basically the endorsement without saying it, right? Like, oh, here's what we have internally, so this is what our members are thinking. And you think about where the Teamsters have most of, or a big chunk of their membership is in Pennsylvania and Michigan. And the United Auto Workers, same deal. I think those states are close enough where if enough people are voting for Donald Trump from those two unions alone, that could be enough for him to win those states. So, yeah, this is huge. And once again, it shows, Larry and Roger, that Democrats are the party of elites, right? You saw – there's Kamala Harris with Oprah Winfrey and all these phony actors, right, on that horrible coronation they did for on Thursday night. And then there's Trump getting support of the real working men and women of this country. That's the difference right now, and it's flipped the whole script because Democrats used to be known as that party. Now they're not anymore. They ain't your daddy's donkeys, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. It's right out of your book. Roger, I'm thinking, as Joe mentioned, the UAW, I was thinking, steel workers and pipe fitters and petrochemical unions, all those people. I mean, I think Trump's going to do extremely well there.
Well, the other brilliance here is his proposal to end the tax on tips cuts very deeply into the culinary union in Nevada and the hotel and restaurant workers union in New Jersey. It's the same national union. They just have different names locally. In Nevada, the culinary union in Nevada and Reno, these are the people who work in the casinos and the casino restaurants. That was the backbone of Harry Reid's Democrat machine. Trump has cut very deeply into their membership with that proposal. New Jersey is also in play. Trump speaking in Uniondale is brilliant, not just because New York will be close, but New Jersey is actually in play, and a substantial amount of the media from the New York market spills off into eastern Pennsylvania. So that trip, in which, by the way, 60,000 people showed up to the Nassau Coliseum, which only seats 16,000.
Wow, 60,000?
60,000.
Whoa!
That is the estimate of local police. It was an amazing event, but the media coverage of it hits three states where Trump is now in contention. I would admit to you, New York is a long shot, but New Jersey's not a long shot. Trump is gaining swiftly in New Jersey, and of course, Pennsylvania could be the ballgame.
You know, also is a story in the New York Times Siena poll showed how unpopular New York Governor Hochul is. In fact, Trump's favorability was much higher than Hochul's favorability. Now that, as you said, New York's a long shot for Trump, but underneath that are the congressional seats that are necessary for a Republican House majority. There's 4 House members that are involved in that, and there may be more. I mean, Ed Cox, the chairman, the Republican state chairman, and a dear friend, he and John Faso, former House member, stopped the gerrymandering and redistricting several years ago that allowed the 4 seats were crucial to the House Republican majority. Hochul is so unpopular, she may be dragging down the whole underticket. I mean, very interesting point. Let me just go, Joe Contra, I'm reading that Virginia is in play. Latest poll, Virginia. I think only 2 points separate Trump and Kamala. I had Governor Youngkin on the TV show this week, and he was the guy was pretty good, actually, pounding away on the economy and talking about how Virginians have suffered from that economy. I mean, if New Jersey's in play and Virginia's in play, wow, that's a different election than 2020, even than 2016 to some extent. What do you think, Joe?
As a Jersey guy, I will tell you it is absolutely in play. Just talking to people on the ground, people who said they have voted Democrat before are now just completely tired of it. And cost of living mainly is what's blamed. I believe Virginia's in play as well because Glenn Youngkin's at 60% approval in what is pretty much a blue state. So if you got a governor that popular and he's campaigning the hell out of for you, then that's going to be in play. But let me give you 2 more numbers here. It was from the Fox News poll in the crosstabs. Amazing. Donald Trump is at nearly 30% support among blacks nationally, black voters, right? That's incredible. And another one, and I'll leave it here, 55% of voters believe Kamala Harris will say anything to get elected. 55% believe this. So I don't know. I see the national polls. I see her up 2 or whatever, 3. But then I just don't feel the sentiment. Like, I thought Biden would win in 2020 going into that election. I don't feel that here at all for Kamala Harris.
All right. Trump's winning almost half of the Hispanic voters, which is remarkable. Joe Concha, Fox News, thank you so much. Roger Stone, The Roger Stone Show, 3 to 6 p.m. Sundays on many of these same stations. I'm Kudlow. We're going to come back and talk about the Federal Reserve's gift to Kamala with John Carney of Breitbart News.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Let's talk about the Federal Reserve going political, giving Kamala Harris a big 50 basis point gift. It's all these agencies. We're talking about the Secret Service, the FBI, the intelligence agencies, top of the agencies, all run by liberals. It's really something. Trying to help Kamala. Now we got the Fed, supposedly independent. It's not so independent. Let's talk to John Carney, Breitbart News editor for economics and finance and co-author of the Breitbart Business Digest at the Daily. You got to read this thing. It's terrific. John, first of all, who was the first guy to say it was a gift to Kamala? Me.
It was. Those are your words, Larry.
Wednesday, when you all came on set. I mean, really, in the next segment, I'm going to have Conrad DeQuatros, who's one of the best numbers guy in the business, and he's going to show how the Fed has given up on data dependency. But this thing, John, Trump is properly pounding it on the campaign trail. I talked to him about it. What did I do? Wednesday or Thursday? I don't remember when. But anyway, what do you think about this story, and where's this headed?
So one of the things that I think is very interesting is that the media and the Democrats are talking out of both sides of their mouth on this. When Donald Trump complains that it was a political move, they say, he's interfering with the independence of the Fed. And yet, at the same time, you have a Washington Post story admitting that this is a big boon to Kamala Harris.
Oh.
And you have, they have Mark Zandi, who's he's a good economist, but he's a Democrat through and through at Moody's Analytics, saying that this is a economic tailwind for the Harris campaign.
Who is it, John? Was it Jeff Stein who wrote the piece in the Washington Post?
Yeah, it was Jeff Stein wrote the Washington Post piece.
Yeah.
And they are admitting that yes, this is meant to help Harris. It helps Harris. And yet, when Donald Trump points that out, they say, "Oh no, it's interference with the Fed," which is something they've been saying for the longest time. Larry, you were there. You remember Donald Trump said all along, "I'm expressing my opinion about what the Fed should do, not dictating what they are going to do."
Mm-hmm.
And yet they screamed that it was, interference. But of course it wasn't. Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, they write open letters urging 75 basis points. Joe Biden says, "I bet you they're going to cut by the end of the year." Guess what? His bet was right. So, talk about interfering with the independence of the Fed. If Donald Trump said it, they would freak out. It's a form of Trump derangement syndrome that anything Trump says is interference with the Fed. Anything the Fed does, no matter how helpful it is to Kamala, they say, no, it's not, except when they think they're talking among themselves and they admit, this definitely helped Kamala.
Fox Business News, Edward Lawrence, reporter, he's a very, very good reporter, asked Jay Powell if this had any political overtones. And Powell's answer was pure word salad. I mean, it was just pure word salad. He refused to answer the question, and I think that's very telling. And one other point, John, Mickey Bowman, who was a Trump appointee to the Fed, dissented. All right,
yes. It's
the first dissent, and I don't know how. You tell me how long, but that irked Jay Powell when he was asked about it. You could see it. Everybody else said this, blah 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 blah. But the fact that
he really wanted a unanimous committee to support him. She, I think, recognized it is the first time we've had dissents from Fed presidents who, they rotate in and off of the committee. But Fed governors vote in every committee. They're appointed for 14 years. So they're there. This is the first time, and it's very rare for a governor to dissent from the Fed chairman. And so this is the first time, I think, since 2005 that a Fed governor has dissented. And she said something very reasonable, which was, why are we doing 50? We could have done 25. I would have, frankly, gone even further. I see no reason on earth to do this except politics before the election. Why not wait?
The next meeting, as you've said, the next Fed meeting is the day after the election. So they could have waited 6 weeks. That's what they could have done. And then why? I mean, it's so clear that this was a political move. I mean, what's the impact going to be? Is there any impact of this boosting Kamala?
I think it prevents the stock market from, deteriorating. Is one, obviously, lower rates, easier financial conditions gives a boost to the stock market. I also think that it allows, and we saw Biden doing this on Thursday, the day after the Fed meeting, saying that this is a sign that inflation is no longer a problem. Remember, that's the biggest problem for Kamala Harris in this election is people are very upset with inflation. So what they want is for the Fed to be sending a message that inflation isn't a problem, that people don't need to think about inflation when they go into the election booth. But I don't think that's going to work. I mean, Donald Trump got this right when he said it's too late. Inflation is on people's minds. You can bring down the rate of inflation. And by the way, the rate of inflation is still well above the Fed target. But you can bring it down to 2.5%, but people aren't going to forget that their groceries are up 22%, that their car insurance is up 54%. That's not going away. And I think no matter, they may be trying to help Kamala, but I think the actual help is going to be relatively limited.
Let me see. Was Scott Besson on with you Wednesday in the TV show? Because remember what he said was very interesting, that middle income people, working folks, and lower income people are hit the hardest by the cumulative rise of prices, which is like a tax on their wages. And, that's not going to change. And Scott has been saying, he's a potential Treasury Secretary or, some high financial position if Mr. Trump should win. He's been saying all along that, in a sense, the middle and lower quintiles of the income standard, they're in a recession right now. They're the ones getting clobbered by the credit card rates and the mortgage rates and the drop in real wages. They're the ones that are getting killed, and that's part of Trump's working class coalition, it seems to me.
That's right. A lot of the things that you have very little flexibility on have gone up a lot. So again, car insurance is one of those things. You have to have car insurance, so you don't get you don't get a choice about whether or not you have car insurance. You're legally mandated to have it. It's up 54% since Biden came into office. So that is squeezing everybody who owns a car. And I said this at the very beginning of this inflation episode. I wrote a Breitbart Business Digest column in which I said, in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's America, the poor pay more. That is what has happened.
Right.
And Scott is absolutely right that it is crushing the people who can least afford to get hit. And look, the rich and the upper middle class at least have an offset. It still is bad for everybody, but there's an offset in that you've seen how if you own a house, your home price went up. If you own stocks, you've seen stocks go up. So there's an offset, but it's for people who aren't big asset owners. Those include young people, people with lower skills, people who have just had a harder time in life. Those are the people who have gotten hit the hardest by this giant explosion of inflation.
Sure, the top 5% in the stock market, whether they own the index, whatever they own, they've had a tremendous wealth effect. Wealth's gone up, and that's been their buffer from the inflation. Middle-income people may own 401ks and IRAs, but not near to the extent, right? Just the levels of income are too low. So you're right; they get hit the hardest. Well, anyway, we'll see how this plays out, John. We'll see you on the set of the TV show this week, folks. John Carney. You got to read Breitbart Business Digest. He runs that thing every single day. John, you spend a lot of time on that, don't you?
I do. We spend a lot of time. Frankly, it's been very rewarding because by focusing on this day in and day out, putting out this great product, it's actually made me better at figuring out what's going to happen to the economy. Because when you have to do it day after day, and you look at all the numbers. Yes, it gives you a really good insight into how the economy is developing.
You guys should sell it. $200, sell it. Subscriptions. 1 million people who subscribe, you get rich. Alex Marlowe get rich. You can all get rich. I want you to get rich.
Thanks, Larry. I'll bring it up. It's a great idea. I think we should.
John Carney of Breitbart, everybody. Thanks, John. I'm Kudlow. We're going to take a quick break, and then my very dear friend Conrad DeQuatros, one of Wall Street's best economists, is going to tell us why the Fed's decision to cut by 50 departs from what they call data dependence, which really does imply politics. I'm Kudlow. Be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
So we're going to talk some more about the Fed and also which direction, where's the economy headed, with my old and dear friend Conrad DeQuatro, Senior Economic Advisor for Breen Capital and a founding partner of RDQ Economics, with my former deputy, John Riding. Thank you, Conrad, for this. I'm just reading your report after the Fed decision this past week, the Fed abandons data dependency with a 50 basis point rate cut and dovish SEP rate path. That's their dot forecast. So I was talking to John Carney, but more sort of in a more macro political sense. But your point, and I agree with this, it's hard to understand why you would have an emergency rate cut. They only do 50 basis points. I mean, they did it for COVID and 9/11. When the economy doesn't look that bad. And I was just looking this morning, Conrad, the Atlanta Fed's GDP tracker, for whatever that's worth, but they're pretty good. They got 2.9% for the third quarter, which is not an emergency by any stretch. And anyway, tell me why you think they've left data dependency.
Well, thanks for having me on, Larry. I think the points that you made are an important one in terms of the 50 basis point rate cut being tending to be something that is delivered in an emergency versus the more traditional 25 basis points. And if we look at the history of the Fed beginning to cut rates and beginning a rate cutting cycle, there's really only been two episodes in which they've started with 50 basis point rate cuts. The first was back in January of 2001. When there were signs that the economy was weakening quite significantly. Inflation was very modest back then. 1.7% was the core PCE inflation rating that they now focus on, although they weren't focused on it back then. But inflation was modest. The economy was weakening sharply. We'd had a year in which equity prices were falling sharply in 2000. And they started a rate cutting cycle with 50 basis points. The other time was in August of 2007 when we were on the precipice of a financial crisis. And it was right after employment had declined. We got the most recent employment report. It showed a decline in non-farm payrolls, and then they delivered a 50 basis point rate cut. So the point that I'm making about the lack of data dependency here is some of the points that you just made. The Atlanta Fed report, for example, which is showing GDP's tracking almost 3%. The prior quarter was 3%. The economy is doing okay. Like obviously, employment growth has slowed, but it doesn't feel like an emergency. And the other point that I think is important is what's going on with inflation. They've not completed the job on getting inflation down to target. We have inflation that's still running about 0.5% above what they have defined as a target, which is 2%. I don't think that that's price stability, but they're telling us that 2% price gains is price stability. We haven't even gotten to that yet, and they're cutting rates aggressively. And that to me just doesn't speak of data dependency.
You are writing, you and John are writing, we have a 3-year average PCE inflation rate, more than double the inflation target. The 3 years is 4.1%. That's a really interesting point. It's interesting because it's a trend, all right? And, you know, what's his name? Chris Waller is saying the last 3 or 4 months, the PCE has come down, I think, below target. But, you know, that inflation's tricky business. And once it gets into the innards of the economy, there's some evidence on consumer confidence surveys that inflation expectations actually might be ticking up a little bit. But the trend is not your friend. And that's another thing the Fed is ignoring. I mean, 3 or 4 months, so what? And that's, you know, year to year is still above the target of 2%. I believe year to year is 2.5%. And you're saying the 3 year is 4.1%. That's a very interesting point and an interesting way of looking at it, Conrad.
And even looking at longer averages, the 5-year average of PCE inflation is a little above 3.5%. That's 5 years. The Fed has been missing its inflation target for 3.5 years. They don't expect to get it back down to target for another 2 years. And I'm saying that I don't even think that their target is price stability, but that's what they've told us. 2% is price stability. This idea of averaging inflation over longer periods, again, is the objective that they have set out, and they're failing to meet it. And so my question is, in this environment where the inflation problem has not yet been resolved, 5-year inflation of 3.5%, you pointed out, we wrote 3-year inflation is above 4%. And you just mentioned inflation expectations. I mean, one of the issues that I had with this move it was very poorly laid out in terms of the communications and the lead up to the decision. The Fed said that 25 basis points, they had sort of signaled that 25 basis points is the way we'll go unless the data change. And we got a pretty poor CPI inflation report. We had inflation expectations, which you just mentioned. The University of Michigan survey of inflation expectations over a 5 to 10 year period went up to 3.1%. That's the highest reading that we've had almost in a year. And in the face of that, they delivered a large rate cut. And to me, I just don't see the reasoning for it if you're trying to explain it based on the data. And again, they're telling us they're making these decisions based on the data, and I just can't draw the dots between their supposed data-based policy decisions, the 50 basis point rate cut, and the actual data that we're seeing.
Well, look, Jay Powell, and if you read the press release, it just says the economy is strong. I mean, it just says that. So that's why my first reaction, okay, whatever I think, I don't think the economy is all that strong. I mean, I think you got problems in housing and manufacturing, but the consumer is driving the economy. And if the economy is strong, you don't cut rates, or you don't cut rates by half a point. Half a point. It sounds like we're in an emergency, Conrad. We're not.
Yes, and I think some of the issues that you have, I mean, obviously there's the issue of communications in terms of the Fed didn't sort of outline they outlined their decision-making process and said that maybe if the data suggests we do something more aggressively, we'll do that. The data didn't show that. Yeah. And so in my opinion, what they've done here is they've sort of wasted a bullet in terms of an additional quarter-point hike, a cut that they didn't need to deliver.
All right. Conrad DeQuatros, everybody. RDQ Economics, Senior Economic Advisor, Breen Capital, an old friend. There's no better Wall Street economist than Conrad DeQuatros. A quick break, and we're going to talk about the Middle East and Israel with Aaron Cohn.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
So Israel on the march against Hezbollah, located, of course, to the north in Lebanon, Beirut, and succeeding with some brilliant strikes and some unbelievable counterterrorism. We bring on the show one of my favorites, Aaron Cohn. It's Prince Aaron Cohn. He's the Israeli special ops veteran and now founder of Cherries, which specializes in counterterrorism training for law enforcement. Aaron, thank you for doing this on a Saturday. We're much obliged.
Good to be here with you, Larry. Always good to be with you.
You know, I'm reading, I want to get to the pagers and the walkie-talkies and all that, but the Israeli airstrike, I guess yesterday, hitting the Beirut stronghold of Dayef, however you pronounce it. But here's the thing. They nailed this son of a bitch, Ibrahim Akil, the commander of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, as well as some 10 commanders. This guy had a $7 million price bounty on his head. He was the guy, I guess, who was behind the truck bombings way back in 1983. It's dear to my heart because they killed nearly 300 U.S. military service people. That's point number one, breaks my heart. And number two, Ronald Reagan was president. I was a young man. I was the associate budget director at OMB. So we finally got this guy. And there's got to be a message here to the Hezbollah. How do you see it, Aaron Cohn? How do you look at this?
Well, it was a really significant strike, Larry. The way I see this right now is Israel has really released the brakes. Israel said it would. People shouldn't be surprised. You know, you can't sit back and be passive with terrorists. They'll just kill you. They'll cut your head off. They'll gut you, they'll maim you, and they'll let you bleed out like we saw on October 7th, like we saw with the Marine barracks bombing. So on October 8th, when Israel got when the message was sent by Hamas, and I've been saying this, you know, with you and with everybody on the news, everybody thought Israel was going to get pushed into the ocean. I said, whoa, hang on a second here. Israel's really good at this stuff. Give Israel a minute to get the engine warmed up, and then you're going to see some serious operations unfolding. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what you just mentioned, which was the targeting of the Hezbollah military official, Ibrahim Akil, who was the head of the Radwan unit for Hezbollah, which is equivalent to their special forces. And Israel took out about a half a dozen high-level commanders in one attack, hiding in a building underneath civilians in Beirut, deep into Beirut. And so the gloves are now really coming off. And this operation, the pager operation, this is all connected, Larry. The pager operation is 5-6 months in the making. You know, these operations take years to be able to pull off. You've got to target assets and embed companies. You know, this is something that Israel does, you know, they started decades ago throughout Europe to be able to set up these shell corporations, which is what Israel does. You know, the days of running spies out of consulates, those days are over. This ain't the 60s and the 70s. That's for the old James Bond movie. Today, these spies are setting up corporations to be able to recruit assets, and 98% of the people that work for Israel have no idea they're working for Israel, Larry. And so the whole system's been flipped around, and it's really embedded in its deep infiltration. And what you saw play out with the pagers, and now with the attack on Ibrahim Akil, is the fruits of 20 years of intelligence gathering. And Israel's finally released the brake because they really do. When Israel feels like it has information or intelligence that there's going to be an imminent attack, like the one we saw a couple of weeks ago where Israel took out thousands of missiles that were getting ready to get fired at Israel, they preempted. Ismail Haniyeh, they had to take him out. He's a threat to Israel's national security. Israel can't make one mistake, Larry. So that's why Israel's so aggressive with this preemption here. And we're going to see more of this unfolding. But Israel's brilliance is and will always be in its real-time intelligence gathering, getting real-time information, having its assets buried so deep that you have no idea where they are, where they're coming from. And then, all the way down to Israel will preempt the moment there's information, like with this Jericho raid that's supposed to be coming up here. They've been talking about this for years. But if the Radwan Brigade infiltrates Israel from the north, it can be very dangerous for Israel, so they had to take out those planners immediately.
Let me ask, on this incredible, I'll call it counterintelligence or counterinsurgents, the pagers and the walkie-talkies, and they blew up, and they hit, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 presumably Hezbollah people. All right, many were killed, and the rest of them were injured. My question to you, Aaron Cohn, is that how does this affect the communications network for Hezbollah? Is it crippled or is it sufficiently damaged? They're coming in, they're hitting these airstrikes, and they're taking out these commanders and so forth. But now they've hit all these Hezbollah people, and their walkie-talkies blew up and their pagers blew up, which Israel orchestrated. Does that just cripple the communications network of the Hezbollah terrorists?
It does a couple of things. So the first thing it does is it injures. Well, so from what I'm hearing, it's about 5,000 devices, Larry, that were in PETN, which is a very intense explosive that you only need tiny amounts of before. We use it in Semtex. We use it in C4. It's been around forever. This goes all the way back to that explosive composition was placed either in the manufacturing stage, and that company's being investigated out of Hungary. She probably had no idea that she was working for Israel. So that explosive was either placed in the manufacturing phase, but I'm also hearing from sources of mine that it may have been placed in the holding stage where it had to sit outside of Lebanon for a couple of months because they're very careful about how they bring in products specifically for Hezbollah. So there has to be like a 3-month hold, and that may have been when Israel got its little fingers in there. About 5,000 devices were tainted or infected with the explosives. It destroys the immediate communications capabilities of the Hezbollah operators because those are personal communications devices or PCDs. I mean, those are the devices that, that's your day-to-day, Larry. You know, you're getting a page, you got to make the phone call from the hard line. And if you can't speak to each other, you cannot plan terrorism. You can't organize a thing. So not only are the comms down, but there's thousands of these guys injured. So there's the psychological aspect, which you and I have talked about, which is very intense. It's almost like the idea of getting killed by Larry, by Israel, is almost worse than getting killed by Israel.
Yep.
The mind is a very dangerous tool. Mm-hmm. And Israel's a master at that psychology. And they're starting to flip the script on these guys, and they're doing it in less than a year. So the comms are down, the injuries are significant, and then the cherry on top is taking out a heel. It's a multi-layered operation, and I think it's got a tremendous effect on Hezbollah. And I think it makes Hassan Nasrallah, which we discussed the other day, do I want to continue with Israel? Because I'll tell you, the bigwigs are the biggest cowards.
Why don't they get him? Why don't they nail Nasrallah? I'm sure they're looking at it.
I think they're trying. I think they're tightening the noose, Larry, but I don't think it's as easy to get these guys. There's a lot of layers. And, these guys are in the spy business, too. I just think there's a lot of layers. Israel's got to peel back. The good news is that Israel, and Chipsuta pagerim, like we say in Hebrew, they were on those pagers, Larry, for months. Mm-hmm. So they've got an incredible mapping that they've been able to do now throughout the entire Hezbollah network, from Iran to Lebanon to Tukarim, to Taibeh and Marjun and all these. Who knows how many tunnels they've dug, Larry? I don't think Israel's really unpeeled the onion there. I think there could be a lot more problems that Israel's still sort of figuring out right now. But having the ability to track those pagers for 5-6 months, I think, was very.
Oh, so it was an intel. Oh, sure. So they're picking up intelligence.
Well, that was the third thing I was going to throw in there. So
I hadn't thought about that.
That's right.
So they're tapped in. They're tapped into those communications.
Yeah, they just outsmarted Hezbollah. Wow. They did it in a very quiet way, and that's why the intelligence for Israel is so important. Like, the U.S. can kind of miss. The U.S. has got the submarines and the might and the deterrence, but Israel's like. We have a tiny military. We have a 500,000, whatever it is, and it's all counterterrorism. And so everything's got to be we can't make mistakes. Then we got Blinken, and we got Harris, and we got Biden. And me, I don't get political, but they're always pointing a finger at Israel. And they're like, hey, man, you got to go easy in Rafah. You got to go easy here. You got to go easy. Okay, so watch this. We're going to blow off everybody's groins in one button. How's that? Does that work for you guys?
Listen, let me ask you one last question. I just got a minute here. So what the Israelis have done in Beirut with Hezbollah, does this Sinwar, the Hamas leader Sinwar, does this have any impact on him? I'm sure they're trying to nail him, but Israel still has some work to do down south along the Rafah line.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they're two separate campaigns. Sinwar is almost a symbol at this point right now. And from what I'm hearing, he is surrounded by the remaining hostages. Oh, and that's the only reason why he's alive.
Right.
It's just Right. Yep. And so that is such a quagmire. That is such, that's the kind of thing where friends of mine are going, man, what I would do to be on that Sinwar mission. That's what everybody's seething over, to get Sinwar, but there's nothing they can do. I wouldn't be surprised if they even know what general area he's in. He could be surrounded by, the last 100 hostages. And so, I don't think Gaza is an issue anymore, except for the hostages. I think the real focus now, and the IDF just said this a couple of days ago, Larry, time to start focusing our mission on the northern part, the northern threat.
Right.
And the reason why is because if Hezbollah invades, and who knows, 50, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000, who knows how many, Israel's got itself a serious problem, but they've got to get those 80, 100,000 civilians back in their homes. And I think Israel's done enough to Gaza at this point where it's quiet. Time to start focusing on the north. And the good news is Israel's been dealing with this crap for years. So, Bibi, you can say what you want about the guy. Give the guy a break. He's trying to save a country. I've always been a fan of Bibi. I think he means well.
Me too.
Yeah, I think he means well. He lost his brother, who was a treasure.
And the country, what?
The
The country has rallied around him. In the beginning, his polls were very bad. There were a lot of political issues. I don't want to go into it. But the polls now in Israel, very favorable to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Very favorable. He's been a good wartime leader, and you're right. And you know what? Biden and Blinken and the rest of them have been lousy wartime leaders. They're always pointing the finger at Israel. So tired. You and I have talked about this on the TV show. I'm just so tired of it. But God bless Israel. I mean, they're just brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. Bottom line, the Israelis are smarter. You know what, Prince Aaron Cohen? The Israelis are smarter, okay? And they're doing it. That's what's happening here. And they're going to hold the line, win this thing. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Aaron Cohen, everybody, is a brilliant guy. He's on the TV show all the time. Israeli special ops veteran. He's got a new company called Cherries, and it's counterterrorism training for law enforcement folks. Thank you, Aaron Cohen. We appreciate it. Folks, take a quick break. And then Congressman Mike Waltz, brilliant guy, by the way, from Florida. And we're going to talk some more about this Secret Service disaster and maybe some other things. I'm Kudlow. Please stick around.
Larry Kudlow. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
So we return to the topic of the Secret Service and the problems and mistakes they've made. And I will say again that it is not clear, still not clear, that President Trump, former President Trump, has full presidential protection. So we're going to talk with Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida, who knows a thing or two about this. Mike, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. There's a story up on Breitbart. Representative Clyde, I guess, I don't know him, Andrew Clyde of Georgia. I'm sure you know him. Anyway, he is reporting that Speaker Mike Johnson, demanded that Biden provide Trump with the same level of protection that he called Biden. I don't know when the call was made. It might have been yesterday, the day before. Mike Waltz, what's interesting, you were when we were in Washington, you were on the TV show. I had interviewed Mike Johnson for the AFPI conference and asked him, the first question I asked him was, have you talked to Biden? So I guess he wound up talking to him. But, Mike Waltz, we don't know what the outcome is. I mean, you all passed a House bill unanimously, which I think has the right language. But as far as Mayorkas at DHS or Biden or the Secret Service itself, we don't know that they've actually done full presidential-type protection.
Yeah, Larry, good to be with you. You're right to be frustrated. I think the American people are right to be frustrated. I can share with you what the Secret Service director has repeatedly shared with us, and that Trump, Harris, and Biden all have the same levels of Secret Service protection now. There are some, and this gets into the nuances, there are some important and classified differences that the current commander-in-chief Biden has, because he's got literally his finger on the nuclear button. Now, that's a separate conversation if Biden's even awake or aware of that. But we're told he has the same, Larry. I think this is much more about a failure of culture, a failure of complacency, and a failure to make your protective detail match the threat. I actually think the conversation of make Trump equal to Biden is not the right conversation. I think if suddenly we find out that the Russians, Iranians, North Koreans, domestic terrorists are trying to kill J.D. Vance, then he should have the most protection, right? That's why I keep saying it needs to be based on the threats and what we know the threats to be. And the Iranians have had, and you know this because you know many of the people involved, ongoing plots with their intelligence agencies working through the cartels in Mexico, using the Venezuelans to infiltrate our southern border for years now, not just Trump, but Pompeo, Milley, O'Brien, everybody involved in the Soleimani hit. So they should have had a surge of protective assets years ago. And but for the grace of God, we've foiled 2 Iranian plots. There are more ongoing right now as we speak. So my question is more, where is Biden and Harris to impose consequences on Iran or anyone else that dare try to assassinate one of our political leaders? And we have had radio silence, not even a strongly worded speech from this White House or the Harris campaign about these ongoing plots.
Yeah, it's called appeasement, as you well know. Their policy of appeasement on Iran and elsewhere, but let's focus on Iran, has completely backfired, as appeasement always does. But, Mike Waltz, I want to go back, though. After the assassination attempt in Butler Field in Pennsylvania, when they grazed Trump's ear, all right, that was like a providential, miraculous survival there. But after that, the Secret Service said they'd granted him full presidential protection. However, the episode, the attempted assassination on the Trump golf course in Florida, showed that he did not have full presidential protection. If he had it, they would have had the outside perimeter. They would have had much more resources on the inside. They would have had drones. They would have had dogs. You know this stuff better than I do. That's my point.
That's right.
The Secret Service told an untruth after Butler Field. And after watching this guy row in his press conference yesterday, I have no confidence in this because it's not about money. They've had huge monetary increases. It's, as you say, it's about placement and it's about threat risk. But I don't have any confidence that anything's really changed. Your House bill when will the Senate vote on that? Because that is a good bill. That's a very good bill. When will the Senate vote on that?
Well, when will Schumer do anything is a broader question. I don't know that he's going to vote on that. By the way, just as you're having guests on to talk about government funding, the CR, all of those pieces, the House has passed 70% of government funding. It's been sitting on Schumer's desk now for the better part of this year. So I don't think Schumer plans to do any damn thing between now and the election, but blow hot air.
Well, then Trump is at risk. I mean, I believe he's at risk.
But the thing is, Larry, even if Schumer picked it up and we passed it and we gave them more money, you know how government works. It's going to take months for that money to actually flow into the agencies and for them to buy anything. Mayorkas can shift resources right now. Secret Service also has a counterfeiting, a very important but not life or death counterfeiting missions. Shift agents from that. I've talked to agents on Biden's current detail, and they're telling me they're sitting around because all he's doing is sitting around in Rehoboth. Right? You can shift agents internally, but he also has the U.S. Marshals. He has TSA. He has HSI, the Homeland Security Investigative Force. So if you have a bunch of leaders up in New York right now, which is taxing, you got to protect them. Shift those guys, and shift the agents to where the threat is greatest, and that's with President Trump. But that can be done now. The money will take a while to get in.
All right. Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida, thank you, sir. We appreciate it very, very much. Folks, we'll take a break, and then on the other side, we're going to do some stock market work.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the Larry Kudlow Show. By the way, you can get us on the internet, live streaming on the internet, LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. You can hear it around the country, throughout the world, including the solar system and the Milky Way. Don't miss a thing. And during the week, please join us, Fox Business, fabulous Fox Business. The name of the show is Kudlow, 4 to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. And if for some reason you can't get there at 4, well, just text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. It's not hard. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about in the stock market, which was roaring this week after the 50 basis point cut by Jay Powell in the Federal Reserve. We're bringing in David Bahnsen, Bahnsen Group CEO. He's the founder and managing partner, author of the DividendCafe.com, and his latest book is Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. And my pal Jim LeCamp, Senior Vice President for Investments at Morgan Stanley. All right, gentlemen, this could be fun. Let's see. The Dow is up 670 points. The NASDAQ 264, the S&P 500 up 77 points, so it was a big week. Interestingly, after the 50 basis point cut, interest rates in the Treasury market went up a little bit, 8 to 10 basis points. Anyway, David Bahnsen, what do you make of this story? Did the Fed do the right thing, and what's the stock market impact?
Well, I think that the stock market has been pricing in the expectation of it for quite some time, and that's why a lot of this is so different than past rate-cutting cycles. For one thing, we're not in recession. It's true that about half the time the Fed begins cutting rates, markets are not up a year later. And the reason is a lot of times when the Fed is cutting rates, it's real bad economic stuff going on. There's a mixed bag right now in the economy. I think everybody knows that. But here's the real story to me, Larry, and I am just mystified when no one's talking about it. They are quantitative tightening while they're cutting rates.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only time since the financial crisis and they introduced the second policy tool of bond buying, the only time that the two policy tools in their toolbox are working against each other. I don't believe that can last.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
It's an interesting point. Believe it or not, I read that in your Dividend Cafe. I do my best. I do my best. But that's an interesting point. In other words, to our listeners, in effect, the Fed is selling bonds out of their portfolio. That's their balance sheet, which continues to come down, which I personally think is a good thing. But it does contradict, as David Bahnsen said, the fact that they're trying to ease up on the interest rates. So, Jim LeCamp, why don't you react to that? Did the Fed do the right thing, number one? And number two, what about David's point that you have contradictory policy levers going on?
It's really an interesting time, and I think David makes a very, very good point. And that's not the only confrontation that the Fed is looking at. We're also looking still at a massive confrontation between monetary policy and fiscal policy. And I think one of the reasons this economy is not in recession, and this is the wrong answer, but one of the reasons is we've still got a lot of government money sloshing around in the economy, particularly for infrastructure-type projects. The bad news is that last $1 trillion in growth that we've seen has cost us $1.5 trillion. So I think if Kamala Harris gets elected, and for that matter, Donald Trump, he is no spendthrift. Let's be clear about that. Either one are probably going to turn on more of the federal spigots, and I think that's going to be a real challenge for the Federal Reserve Board to be stimulating the economy by lowering rates. At the same time, we've still got trillions of dollars of money printing seeping into the economy at the same time. And the big question for investors is very, very simple. Are we going for a hard landing or soft landing? Hard to David's point, soft landing, market average is a 17% return after the first rate cut. Hard landing, a 15% drop. And high-yield spreads are not showing recession yet, but there are a lot of parts of this economy that are firing on about 3 cylinders.
Yeah, but just to react to the spendthrift point, Elon Musk is going to come in with a bunch of businessmen, if Trump wins, and take several $1 trillion out of the government.
I love that.
That's what
if they can pull that off.
It's an interesting.
I love it. I love the idea.
I'm not saying that this is going down the road. And first of all, we don't know who's going to win. I understand that, but I do think the Elon Musk connection, and I know it's a very real thing. I mean, I've talked to my former boss about it. He's going to give it his best shot, and he also wants to rescind, which needs congressional approval, but he would rescind the entire misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, which, Dave Bahnsen, that thing's now worth over $1 trillion of, Green New Deal climate change subsidies that had nothing to do with inflation. So it's a speculative point, but I just wanted to throw it in. And one other point. During the Trump years, spending as a share of GDP was only around 20%. In recent years with Biden-Harris, it's up to 24 to 25%. And I think, Dave Bahnsen, I don't want to have to defend every policy. In some sense, I'm responsible for some of the old policies, but they may trim a lot of fat from the government.
Larry, I don't mean to take the other side of it because I think you're right about some of the instincts, and a lot of it is going to come down to personnel.
Mm-hmm.
If Trump is reelected, I got to see who some of the people are he's going to bring back because personnel is policy.
Right.
But look, we can talk about Elon Musk and taking some fat out of government. We can talk about infrastructure, getting rid of the badly named Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of things going on. But if they don't involve in a discussion of entitlements, then they're not doing anything. Because that is the real cause of government spending is transfer payments. The additional 3.5% of spending of GDP in the last 4 years has all come in transfer payments, every bit of it.
Yeah, no, that's
the problem.
That's correct. No, those are the so-called smaller entitlements. But you're quite right. Well, look, we'll see. You're also right.
I think the bond market here is a very important part of this whole discussion. Whether it's Trump, whether it's Vice President Harris, whether the Fed is doing the right thing or not, you got a 10-year at 3.7%. That's the issue. Is that if people think inflation is going to be 2, 2.5, 1.5, it doesn't matter. They're predicting real GDP growth with a 1 in front of it. That's what we had in the Obama years post-financial crisis. You cannot keep this country going the way we believe in aspiration, prosperity, growth, opportunity with 1.5% real GDP growth. And the bond market is telling you we're going back to that very low real GDP. It's not good.
What do you think? Jim McCamp?
Yeah, it always happened. I mean, if you look at just read Rogoff and Reinhardt's book. If you look at the history, and Lacey Hunt writes about this a lot as well. If you look at the history of federal government spending as a percentage of GDP, once you cross about 125%, which we did going about 99 miles an hour, once you do that, you have chronically slow GDP growth. And when you get your paycheck right now, a lot of people don't realize, and you look at how much money was taken out for taxes, the biggest part of that now goes to interest expense. It doesn't get back into the economy. It doesn't build roads. It doesn't create jobs. It just goes to interest expense. And what you end up with, I don't want to call it turning Japanese. I don't want to channel the vapors, but it's what happened there. It's a good poster child for what happened. Now they had demographic problems, et cetera, that we don't have as much, but it doesn't matter. Once you spend that much money on interest expense, you're going to get a slower GDP, and not to mention all the boondoggles that we have seen with these government spending programs. They're not creating jobs. They're not creating even clean air. They're not lowering inflation. Yeah, you have great names like the Inflation Reduction Act, but none of them achieve their stated goals.
Dave Bunsen, your point.
Steve Jobs is exporting LNG. That's the thing that kills me is the stuff they're doing isn't creating jobs, and the stuff that was creating jobs they stopped doing. Keystone, export LNG. This is the thing that your former boss, Larry, doesn't get enough credit for. And I'm critical of certain things. But I'm telling you, energy policy is his most underrated achievement in those 4 years.
Yes.
And I can't believe that the Biden administration has not taken more criticism. I saw the Chevron CEO this week just hammering them about this delay in approval on export LNG. It's just crazy what it is doing for lost opportunity and job growth.
Who was that? That was Mike Wirth?
Yes,
yeah,
Mike Wirth.
He's a very smart guy. I know him well.
And energy prices are turning up, and they're going to have a bigger problem with inflation than they think if they continue with these energy policies.
I just wanted to sneak in to Dave Bonson's point on the longer-term growth outlook. I'm looking at my sheets, David. The 10-year real yield on the tips is 1.59%. And that's a proxy for, you could say, capital formation or investment, but it's a proxy for the GDP. And it's a 1.59. Yep. You know who talks about that a lot is Art Laffer. He follows that very, very closely. If you go back into, the tips started in 1997, but if you go back and look at the history of those things, they can get to 3% plus and have been at 3% plus, but not for many years. Not for many years. And at 1.59%, you're right. The bond market is predicting very slow growth, And the bond market is predicting very low inflation. The 10-year tips break-evens are 2.15%. So that's a rather unimpressive economy. So I agree with that point. And I also agree with the energy point, 100%. You're down there in Texas, Jim LeCamp. What are they doing?
Oh, my gosh. Have I got something for you? We should
be at 16, 17 million barrels a day, and we're still at 13.
I've got a really whacked out story to tell you. I was sitting with several oil guys, Permian Basin guys, all of them conservatives, and having a beer, and they were all saying that, and making a joke out of it, that if they were going to bet their pocketbook, they would vote for Kamala Harris, because then they know energy prices would be driven substantially higher,
sky high,
and it would help their pocketbook. Now, none of them are actually going to do that, but they were all making that joke that if that's the way they were going to vote, they'd vote for Kamala Harris.
But they won't drill.
Policy.
I mean, the rig count keeps going down. They're not They don't want to drill in that environment. They become capital money managers. That's what they
exactly
do,
right?
Yeah, I mean,
and
they'll make money.
They have a labor problem too. They can't get people to come out there to work. So it's a real difficult proposition, and it's going to hit a hard wall at some point.
Well, look at Harris. Kamala Harris will shut down the spigots for fossil fuels, and or Trump will open the spigots up. So you got to figure. I don't know what the right bet is right now. Dave Bonson.
You play the drillers if Trump wins, and you play the E&P companies if Kamala wins.
You know what the worst performing sector was when President Trump was in office was energy. And you know what the best performing sector has been under Biden-Harris? It's energy.
Yeah.
But that means something different than people think.
Because prices were low.
The prices were low. Yeah. The COVID thing, the starting point where Biden came in, all that matters. But if Harris is elected and they don't approve any new drilling, that kills small cap drillers. If President Trump comes in, you get small cap, you get entrepreneurs, you get wildcatters, you get development. Candidly, we're big holders of Chevron and Exxon. I don't think Chevron and Exxon hurt from a Harris at all because it crowds out competition.
Yep, E&P if she wins, drillers if he wins. Those are the plays.
All right, let's take a break. This is great stuff, both of you. Dave Bonson of the Bonson Group. Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life is his book. It's a very important book on how important work is. By the way, Dave, I interviewed my very dear friend Wilbur Ross, who has a new book out, and it kind of charts his career. He's done fabulously well. He's a multi-billionaire and became Commerce Secretary, et cetera, et cetera. So in the interview, I said, what advice would you give to people who want to be successful in life and in business? You know what he said? His first word, work hard. First thing he said, work hard. What do you think of that?
Well, I love it, and he modeled it throughout his career. And you know what else he did besides work hard? He worked way into life. He didn't stop working at 53. He had $1 billion in his 50s. He kept working in his 60s and 70s.
Jeez,
I love it.
I know somebody else is still working late in life, but I'm not going to mention any names. But I will say we have to take a commercial break. David Bonson of the Bonson Group, Jim LeCamp of Morgan Stanley. Keep on working. I'm Kudlow. I'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
Talking stocks with Dave Bonson of the Bonson Group. His book is Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. And Jim LeCamp, Senior VP Investments at Morgan Stanley. We went over on the first segment, so we just have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Dave Bonson, stock strategy right now?
Look, Larry, I cannot get behind the Mag 7 big tech trade at 48 times earnings. S&P right now, if you believe the most incredibly optimistic earnings growth of next year hitting 280, you're still at 21 times next year's earnings for index investors. this is the time to be rotating to value, to dividends, to more reasonably priced things. Consumer staples, utilities, they've had a big run the last couple months, but they're still pretty fairly valued. Energy, consumer staples, that's where you want to be. Get out of NVIDIA.
Yes, sir. Okay. Jim LeCamp, stock strategy right now?
I don't really disagree, although I think you can hold some of those names in the long run. NVIDIA is somewhat of a unicorn.
Give me a quick one.
Like energy.
Energy. All right, I got it. You're both wonderful. I appreciate it very much. David Bahnsen, the Bahnsen Group, Jim LeCamp, Morgan Stanley, terrific stuff. Folks, hang on a second, and we're going to do some money in politics with Liz Peek and Steve Moore. I'm Kudlow. I'll be right back.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, it's time for Protecting Your Investments, sponsored by Colonial Metals Group. Here's Larry Kudlow.
Hello, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is Protecting Your Investments, sponsored by Colonial Metals. Today, as usual, we're talking about protecting your investment by keeping a sharp eye on money and politics. And let me just add, gold prices are up around $2,600 per troy ounce. So, money in politics, we bring in Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist. We bring in Steve Moore, Committee to Unleash Prosperity, WABC radio host of More Money, which plays right after this show on many of these same stations, and the author of The Trump Economic Miracle.
Woo!
Along with somebody named Art Laffer. Who is that? How's the book selling, Steve Moore?
Well, Larry, you're the kind of first person to officially announce it. It comes out next week.
Oh,
we're
good.
Going to, Arthur and I want to come on your show because it's the number one business show in America.
I want you to come on set, both of you.
We'd love to. And by the way, just one quick thing. Guess who came up with the title, The Trump Economic Miracle?
Trump.
Yes.
How's that?
We were originally going to call it Trumponomics 2.0, and we showed it to Trump, and he goes, I don't like that title. Call it the Trump Economic Miracle.
I knew it. I get a free copy for that guess.
You do.
It's really...
And so does Liz.
All right, terrific stuff. Now, Liz, I want to begin with you. You wrote this really tough, slashing article. I'm reading it from The Hill. Why is Kamala Harris keeping voters in the dark on her energy agenda, kowtowing to the climate zealots currently running unchecked in the Biden-Harris White House will lead to soaring electricity costs and clobber our country's ability to compete in the industries of the future, such as artificial intelligence. Whoa, it's actually quite good, Liz. Anyway, I want you to expand on this column, please.
Well, I mean, look, I think we all know that AI and also mining cryptocurrencies take an enormous amount of power. And yesterday, there was an announcement that Microsoft was teaming up with a group to restart 3 Mile Island, Larry, a nuclear power plant that almost had a very serious accident and basically has been defunct for many years because people are so freaked out about nuclear power. But why are they doing that? Because it's all about AI and powering AI. The demands for electricity over the next 10 to 20 years, if AI progresses as people think, are going to be staggeringly large. And Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, their energy policy has already led to electricity prices, which, by the way, have been stable and low for decades, going up more than 20%. And they will continue to rise rapidly because they're pushing electrification on an electric grid and infrastructure that's not ready, that is increasingly powered by high-cost wind and solar energy, and not making any accommodation, basically, for the rising cost of the power that these industries are going to need. So my point, and I don't think I've said it very well here, is that energy is probably more important today looking forward than it has ever been in our country. Everything that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden want to do and have done about energy will make costs go up. And that's going to put the United States at a huge disadvantage.
Steve Moore, pre-pandemic, Trump had, with his energy policies, opening up the fossil fuel spigots, we had 13 million barrels a day production of oil. Now, the Bidens brag that we have 13 million barrels a day or 13.1 million barrels a day.
Yeah.
But that just basically means over the past 5 years we flatlined, and we shouldn't have flatlined. I mean, I think your studies show 14, 15, or 16 million barrels a day if they kept the spigots open.
That's right. That's right. And Liz is absolutely right that the future, two industries that are going to dominate in the future are going to be electricity generation and data centers. And by the way, in addition to what Liz was saying, data centers use enormous amounts of energy as well. And you can't run the internet without these data centers, and you can't store the information you need. I would add one other thing that we just had an item a couple of weeks ago in the hotline that I think everybody should be aware of, which is here we are in the year 2024. And there's still 1 billion people on the planet, 1 billion people, 3 times the entire population of the United States, that don't have access to reliable electric power. And I'm talking about to turn the lights on, to cook their meals, to run their industries. And a large part of this is because these lunatic climate change people with World Bank money and U.S. tax dollars go to these countries and say, oh, don't build coal plants, don't build natural gas plants, don't build nuclear power plants, use wind and solar. Well, wind and solar doesn't work. I mean, it's a fringe form of energy. And Liz is onto something there. If you really want to ruin the American economy, disrupt our energy supply, and I don't have a problem with windmills in Massachusetts and so on, or solar power in Phoenix, but you cannot run a $26 trillion economy with windmills. It's the dumbest thing I ever heard.
Well, I think that's right. But Liz, in a sense, your column is a rhetorical question because you know what Kamala Harris is going to do if she wins.
Yes.
And as you point out, you got guys like Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who's a climate extremist, and Bernie Sanders, another climate extremist. They're just saying, oh, we know what she believes. Whatever she says now, we really know what she believes. And
Bernie Sanders even admitted that, by the way, in his interview last week. He said, we all know what she's going to do.
Yeah, no, Liz quotes him, says, Harris was doing just what she thinks is right in order to win the election.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and you know what? A couple of things on this. First of all, it is true that oil production is finally 13.2 million barrels a day or whatever, but there is a lead and a lag time. Right. And I want to point out that right now we are running under 600 rotary rigs in the United States drilling for oil. Under Trump, that number was over 1,000. And it takes a while for drilling activity to produce oil, obviously, although now the lead time is shortened because of fracking. But the reality is the Biden-Harris administration is benefiting from the fact that there was substantial oil field investment during the Trump years, not because that has happened under their watch. In fact, they've done everything possible to stifle it, including slow-walking drilling permits, making royalties more expensive, et cetera. So that's one thing. But I also want to call your attention to a new New York Times poll out yesterday that shows Harris and Trump tied. And when asked whether Harris believes what she says, 34% of the respondents said, yeah, she means what she says. She says what she means. 60% say the same of Trump. I don't think people are buying what Harris is selling because she's a phony. And that's coming across, I think, to everybody.
Steve, another point, they've stopped LNG exports. That's utter insanity because it's not only it would kill jobs. You can't make any more LNG installations or so forth. But we should be exporting natural gas to Europe.
You better believe it.
Right?
Yep.
Because otherwise Europe depends on Russia. And we should be exporting LNG to Asia and even to China because it is clean burning fuel. In fact, the Europeans, the greenies, agreed to reschedule now, in addition to windmills and solar, natural gas is good. It's okay. But Biden stopped it. The LNG export, that's insanity.
Yeah, look, I think that the two ends are the energies of the future. Nuclear power, which is the cleanest form of energy. And by the way, you are so right that this was a big deal, by the way, this reopening of the 3 Mile Island. I think we all are old enough to remember when that accident happened. And it happened right at about the time that there was a very famous anti-nuclear movie called The China Syndrome. Do you guys remember that one? About, oh my God. Yeah. And so there was a Hollywood, it was just, a kind of Hollywood media frenzy about how dangerous nuclear power was. And there was an old joke back then, by the way, that more people died in the backseat of Ted Kennedy's car than died at 3 Mile Island.
Yes.
And it happened to be true.
Right.
So nuclear is, but they have, by the way, they now have these smaller nuclear reactors that can, that aren't massive structures that could, provide enough electric power for a town of 60 or 80 or 100,000 people. And that might be the future. But natural gas is so cheap now. We should be using our natural gas and our nuclear power. One other quick point, Larry. What Trump keeps saying in these debates, Russia would not have invaded Ukraine if I had still been president. He doesn't finish the point. He doesn't explain to America why that is. And the real reason is Russia would never have had the money to invade Ukraine if we just continued to build LNG terminals, export our abundant natural gas at cheap prices to the Europeans. Russia would have been out of business. They wouldn't have had the money to roll those tanks into the Ukraine.
At $40 a barrel, some such, Russia has no money. Iran has no money. But at $90 or $100 or more,
that's right.
They got a lot of money.
Yeah.
And even today, oil's a little soft. Jim LeCamp was just on. He thinks it's going to be an oil rally. But whatever, it's around $75, okay?
Yeah.
That still makes Russia very rich. That still makes Iran very rich. You're 100% right. The national security implications of cutting off the fossil fuel spigots are unbelievably negative for the United States. Let's take a break, kids. We'll come back. Liz Peek, Fox News contributor. Steve Moore, The Trump Economic Miracle. That's his book with Art Laffer. Steve's Unleashed Prosperity, and WABC Radio, host of More Money, which comes right after this show on many of these very same stations. We'll be right back with Money and Politics.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
We are talking to Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, and Steve Moore, Committee to Unleash Prosperity, host of the WABC radio show, More Money, comes on after this show on many of these same stations, and co-author of The Trump Economic Miracle with our great friend and mentor, Arthur Laffer. Steve, just give us some high points of the book. Let's promo the book, and then I want to see if he's messaging the book right now. What are the highlights?
Well, one highlight is, I don't know if you saw on the hotline this past week, but we use Chat GPT, GPS, I mean, which is what Liz was talking about in terms of the AI revolution. And we put in there the most influential economists in world history, Larry, in world history. And guess who was number 16 on that list?
Art Laffer.
Arthur Laffer. That's pretty cool.
Should have been
It was
higher.
A great list, by the way. It had Adam Smith and all the great economists of the past. The only thing that was really flawed by that was that Paul Krugman was number 20 on that list. But look, the book is basically, to summarize it very simply, that in every single regard, Trump's performance on the economy was superior to both what happened under Obama and what happened under Biden. This is not a hard story to tell. We had a lousy, remember, there's a mythology about Obama. The Obama economy stunk. We had no growth, and it was a miracle that how Obama won re-election. I don't know, but it was a terrible economy. And then Trump came in and it's boom up until February of 2020, until we had COVID. But even accounting for COVID, and then you look at every statistic, whether it's small business conditions, whether it's the stock market, even adjusted for inflation, still higher under Trump than under Biden Kamala. Gas prices, inflation, real median income. When you look at the mortgage rates, ability to buy a home, every single statistic shows that Trump is superior. And I don't understand why your friends on Wall Street, like at Goldman, I call it Goldman Sachs, how can they say that Kamala would be better for the economy when they've run the place for 3.5 years into the ground?
By the way, that it's interesting, that point. Sure, the Goldman Economics Department, which is a very liberal left,
right?
But the people on the trading floor are very strong for Trump. They're Republicans, right, because they're free market people, right? Yeah. They don't want the government to interfere, and they don't want inflation to go back to 9 or 10%, or worse. Real incomes, by the way, is very important. I wrote a piece on it. You had it in the hotline. Real incomes, overall, Trump is about 5 times Biden. The numbers are roughly 6,000, 5,800 versus 1,300. And if you go by ethnicity, Trump wins blacks, Hispanics, right, whites, about 10 times what Biden did. Now, Liz Peek, to bring you in on this, in your judgment, is Mr. Trump messaging this properly and effectively?
I would say yes and no. He does not really talk about the numbers that you're just talking about. And I went through those numbers today from the Census Bureau. It's really not that complicated. I mean, people did better under Donald Trump. And that's really what, and they know it is the thing. So he needs to really kind of keep reinforcing that by citing those numbers, not only in wealth, which Steve highlighted, I think today or yesterday in his daily brief, but also in income. So people were better off. I think he's getting a little distracted when he talks about putting limits on credit card rates.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks that's a good idea. It's kind of like out of left field. Don't go. He doesn't. In fact, I was just talking about this to someone. I don't think he needs to go there. He needs to just keep reinforcing the stuff that works. Lower taxes. My gosh, the Tax Foundation, I think, came up with an analysis talking about Kamala's plan being a $4 trillion tax hike. And by the way, Steve, no common sense business person thinks that kind of tax increase plus a big regulatory blanket over the economy promotes growth. And
800,000 job loss, according to the Tax Foundation. Nearly 800,000 jobs lost.
That's pretty compelling. And David Solomon, to your point, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, actually rebutted Kamala Harris's claim during the debate that they had approved her, or that they said her program was good. He said that's not really what the report said. What the report actually said was the big influx of illegal workers means that basically there's an increase in employment. I mean, it's really backwards, and I think it's unbelievably stupid analysis. But anyway, I think Trump needs to stick to the things that work: the border, better living conditions, and crime. I think those are all very safe bets, and also energy. I think that's all he needs to talk about.
People really agree with him on energy. I know there's a hardcore climate left, but people of common sense, people in the middle, people independents do very well. One thing that's pretty cool, Steve Moore, it's a little bit different, but when Trump was here in New York, when he was taping Greg Gutfeld's show, by the way, after that he went to a crypto bar. He was buying hamburgers for everybody with crypto. And
I've not heard that.
He's got himself a crypto wallet now. What do you make of that? I personally think it's pretty cool, but what do you think?
Yeah, he is, he with the younger generation, which is a key voting demographic, by the way. He does, he's on message. He's in favor of the internet age, and he's in favor of cryptos and the kind of new economy. And meanwhile, Kamala Harris wants to regulate it to death. I just wrote a column basically saying, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are going to be the death of the internet with all the regulations they want to put out and the restrictions on speech. But I have to say, Larry, I think that Trump was a little off message this week. I think Liz is right. This cockamamie idea of putting caps on credit cards. Who gave him that idea? He had just scored points with, saying that price controls never work. And now, and then the other thing is, don't bring back the state and local tax deduction. That was one of the gems of our tax bill. I don't mind, Larry, by the way, if they maybe increase the limit a little bit. I think it's 10,000, maybe raise it to 15 or even 20,000. But don't give a tax break to millionaires and billionaires in New York and California.
I would have abolished it.
Me too. Me too.
Really, it's a base broadener. It's a tax expenditure. Now on that one, of course, he's catering to he was out in Long Island. He's catering to the suburban.
Of course he is.
So vote. Yeah. But the credit card thing, no. I mean, that's just
stupid.
Not good. Liz, I just wanted to know if you had a crypto wallet. Got yourself a new crypto wallet?
I actually tried to buy crypto. I don't know why I got sort of sidetracked by reporting requirements and stuff like that. I don't know the need for it right now, Larry. I thought I was doing it to sort of just experiment, if you will. And I feel sort of out of touch that I haven't done it. So the answer is no, and I kind of wish I had.
I think it's too hard. I think it's a little hard to tap into it. I mean, I think that's one of the problems, but we hope he stays on message. Anyway, kids, thanks very much. Liz Peek, Fox News contributor. Steve Moore is going to come up many of these same stations, WABC, More Money, and the Trump Economic Miracle with Art Laffer. I'm Kudlow. See you next weekend, folks.